We are delighted that you are here, and we are delighted that the Tonstads are here.
Amen.
Sigve will be giving our lesson this morning, and we know him as a physician in Norway and as a university research professor in New Testament here, and as the author of 3 recent books. One, a commentary on Romans, one, a commentary on Revelation, and one called God of Sense and Traditions of Nonsense, or something like that. Is that close enough?
Exactly like that.
Okay, exactly like that. Good. So, let's have prayer, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Tonstad. Dear God, thank you again for this Sabbath school. Thank you for those who come. Thank you for those who prepare to make presentations, and thank you for the Tonstads for their willingness to spend time with us when they have so few days here in Loma Linda. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for having me. It's not a willingness, it is a privilege to be here. So I'll be sharing some excerpts from the diary of Victor Klemperer, and the title of his diary is I Shall Bear Witness. And the title in German is actually I Shall Bear Witness till the very end. Ich will Zeugnis ablegen bis zum letzten, or zum letzten, to the very end. So this is a wartime or pre-wartime diary written in Germany by Victor Klemperer, who was a professor at the university, at the Technical University in Dresden in Germany, in the eastern part of Germany, for some time in East Germany. So the context of my presentation is that in April this year, I actually made good on that plan I had had for a long time to do a sort of Holocaust tour, you might say. And here, so I went on April 7 to Amsterdam. That's where I started my trip. I started my trip where the Dutch Jews were sent to Auschwitz or to Sobibor in Poland. I first went to the transit camp in Poland, in Holland, called Westerbork, and then on a Tuesday I started my trip going east on a train, because the Nazis sent trains from Holland every Tuesday for 2 years. About 105,000 people, all in all, that traveled that route. I overnighted in Berlin, but I didn't do very much there because I had done some things there before, and I was just needing to overnight somewhere. And then the next day I headed on to Lodz in Poland. Lodz had the second largest Jewish community in Europe prior to the war. 233,000 Jews lived in Lodz. 1/3 of the population of that city, of about 700,000, were Jewish, and there were lots of Jewish culture there. And then I went on. I stayed 2 nights in Lodz. I will have to have some other time. I would love to tell you the whole story, but we're not going to do that here. 2 nights in Lodz, on to Warsaw, then to Lublin, 2 nights in Lublin, and then on to Krakow for 1 night, and then in the sort of no man's land where that arrow came up is Auschwitz, which was my final stop in Poland. Then on to Serena, where Serena met me, because I did the trip so far all by myself, and then Munich, and then south through down here, Verona, to Torino, where I had a reason for going. That was the uttermost point, that route, and then back to 3 stops in Germany: Nuremberg, Dresden, and a town just north of Frankfurt called Marburg, which happens to be the place where the oldest Protestant university in the world is located, the Philipps University, that was founded in 1527, and where Luther, Melanchthon, Zwingli, all the Swiss reformers met in 1529, trying to agree on how to stick together against the Catholics, and they couldn't agree. So anyway, that was my trip. There's the sort of outline of my trip. But the main purpose of my trip was to visit the 6 extermination camps in Poland. 4 of them were pure extermination camps, and they are the 4 extermination camps that were solely dedicated to killing Jews. 2 of them are combined camps. So I went first by way of Lodz to Chelmno. That's where the real serious killing began. And I have started writing on this, and I have written, because the first load of Jews that came to Chelmno came on December 7, 1941. That's Pearl Harbor Day, as you may recall. And I have written that, yes, there was an unknown event, something happening in the remote, in the remote place in Poland at that time. What happened in Pearl Harbor was a familiar scratch on the Earth's surface compared to what was happening in the deeper recesses of the Earth in Chelmno. That is my view of that. Something much more profound took place off screen and far away. So Lodz and Chelmno, yes. Then Warsaw and Treblinka, because Treblinka was the place where they killed most of the Warsaw Jews. There were more than 300,000 of them. And then in Lublin, in the vicinity of Lublin, 3 camps. Majdanek, which is very well preserved, lots and lots to see there. Sobibor, about 250,000 people died in Sobibor. 33,000 of them were Dutch Jews. And then Belchek. Belchek was the place where they killed most of the Jews living in this eastern part here into Ukraine. And the mother of Simon Wiesenthal, who is known to many of us, Wiesenthal, who has been part of the curriculum here on God and human suffering, she died at Belchek. And then Auschwitz, and then the rest of my trip. Yes, so I had company on my trip. On my first leg of my trip, I traveled in the company of Etty Hillesum, who was sent from Holland on September 7, 1943, and perished at Auschwitz on November 30, 1943. She was 29 years old. I love Etty Hillesum. Serena told me I should talk about Etty Hillesum and not Victor Klemperer, but it takes a little more advanced work to talk about Etty. We have to do that some other time. It's hard enough to talk about Victor Klemperer. But I had her company. I reread her diary, and I was much blessed. It reads very different when you sit on those trains, of course. It focuses your mind in an amazing way. And then I reread The Sunflower and other things, because that's Wiesenthal. I had him along, and I traveled in the company of Otto Dovkolka, whose little book Landscapes of the Metropolis of Death was published as recently as 2014, just 5 years ago. And he's a historian living in Israel, and just an amazing recollection late in life by someone who was out at Auschwitz at the age of 10, as a 10-year-old boy. Now, these people are not just sort of chroniclers of history. They are not, to me, just victims. To me, they are also mentors. They are actually some wise people that actually have something to say, quite beyond the horizon of the Holocaust. And then on our return trip from Auschwitz to Turin in Italy, my companion was Primo Levi, who is one of the most exceptional chroniclers of the Holocaust. We found his apartment in just close to the train station in Torino. And the next morning I was out running and I saw this poster and I was so happy because this is a poster featuring Primo Levi's first book that used to have the title "If This Is a Man." The title now in English is "Survival at Auschwitz." But here is a theater in Torino in 2019 performing the entire book, Primo Levi's entire book of his recollection, his life, his survival at Auschwitz. You know, how is that? You know, this is not ancient history. This is quite amazing. So anyway, we're going to Dresden, and we're going to see Dresden has been a very influential city in Europe for centuries. It's still a major city now in the eastern part of Germany, and I think this must be an 18th century painting. You know, it's just it was a lovely life there, and the Russian author Dostoevsky, he came to Dresden, spent 2 years there, and wrote some, you know, his things in the late 1860s. So this was a major city. I traveled the whole distance by train, so I took many pictures of train stations because that's kind of an image for my writing project, what happens in the age of the trains. And Dresden is in the Protestant territory of Europe. So there is a big statue of Luther in front of the Marienkirche that was completely demolished during the war but has been rebuilt. And then on February 15, 1945, the Allies launched a bombing raid on Dresden, a savage bombing raid that led to superheating. So there were temperatures up to 2,000 centigrades in certain parts of the city. It was almost like a nuclear bomb. You know, you could. It's like Kurt Vonnegut says, you can accomplish a lot with ordinary TNT if you just do enough of it. Now, the firebombing of Dresden is thought to be a very bad chapter in the history of the war, but it is probably the reason why Viktor Klemperer survived, because he had been ordered 2 days earlier to report for deportation, and this is at the end of the war. He had been ordered then to report, and then the firebombing started, and there was no infrastructure left in Dresden to take care of him and send him off. So he became a survivor, and we have access to his diaries. So Viktor Klemperer, that's him and his wife Eva, and this is their house up in Dulchen, and I took that picture. I did not take this one because Klemperer died in 1961, but I did take the picture of his house. He talks a lot about his house in the diaries, and just lovely stuff, you know. So who was Viktor Klemperer? He was the son of a Jewish rabbi that came from the eastern part of Europe before the war, and then his father was actually got a job to be a preacher in one of the liberal congregations in Berlin when Victor was still young. And it's interesting to read about that because, yes, they were trying so hard to assimilate. They were trying so hard to belong. And they were liberals, so they had their church service on Sundays, even though they were Jewish. And when the father got this job, the mother took the children out to a butcher store and said, I want a little of everything. A little of everything is also pork sausages. And then they went home and ran home with these pork sausages, and they ate a little of the pork sausages, and they said, now we are just like them. You know, just trying so hard to assimilate, to belong. And Victor himself converted to Protestantism although a conversion to Protestantism for a Jew in Germany at that time is not a major sort of theological transition, because Protestantism at that time is more, you know, how do you live? What are your values? It's not a big theological issue. Yeah. So here he is, Victor Klemperer, and his so the father is a rabbi. His brother, his older brother, is one of the most famous surgeons in Germany during this time. And Victor, he eventually ends up as a professor of French literature in. Well, that would.
I'm watching my.
Okay. You know. Anyway.
Is that all right?
I hope you heard some of what I said so far. So his brother is a surgeon. Victor eventually becomes a specialist in French literature. He becomes a world-class scholar in his field. He writes a book on French literature in the 18th century, French literature in the 19th century. These books are still in print and are considered very respectable books on French literature. And then as Hitler comes to power, he would start a diary. And it is published in English. When it was published in Germany in 1995, late, many years after it was written, it sold immediately 150,000 copies and is still being sold and studied and read as one of the most important inside accounts of the pre-war and war years in Germany. So a very important document. Father, a young boy asks in the circus, what is the man up there on the tightrope doing with that pole? We have a pole here. One of those poles. What's he doing with that pole? Silly boy, it's a balancing pole, and it's what is holding him steady. Oh, dear father, what if he lets go of it? Silly boy, he is holding it steady, of course. Who holds whom? You know, the pole holds the man holds the pole, you know. And Victor Klemperer takes, you know, what does it mean? Why does he tell us this? What's the analogy? Again and again during these years, my diary was my balancing pole, without which I would have fallen down 100 times. What's the meaning of his diary? What is it he tries to do in his diary? He wants to keep his powers of observation pure. He wants to make sure that an abnormal situation does not become normal by, you know, time, that you just get habituated to an extremely abnormal situation and then you can't see it anymore, you see? So he writes in his diary, day in and day out, this happens, this happens, this happens. Actually, after the war, he writes in his diary, I'm going to write a book about the language of the Third Reich, the language of Nazi, you know, the Nazi movement after the war, which he did write. And I have now, I'm the proud owner of 2 copies of the book, one in German. I couldn't wait to get it, so I bought it on my way. And then this one in English, it's translated in English too, The Language of the Third Reich by Victor Klemperer. But, you know, just remember this, and you live in abnormal times. Perhaps we never live in normal times. Perhaps we always, in some ways, live in somewhat abnormal times. How do you stay sort of above? How do you stay, you know, retain a certain perspective, certain understanding of the times and what you wish to be in the context of what is in some ways at all times an abnormal time? It certainly was an abnormal time. in the days of Victor Klemperer, and he says, well, this was his balancing pole, and he would have fallen down without it. First three words of LTI, because in German the title of the book is LTI, Lingua Tertii Imperii, the language of the Third Reich. That's so he wants to. So what are the first three words, in the vocabulary of this period? So he has three words: Strafexpedition, Staatsakt, und historisch. So I'll just explain quickly maybe the first one and just some comment. So there is a young person in their household, a person who was considered a child prodigy, very gifted young man, who came and lived with them in the house. He was very friendly with the family. He gets married. They are still friendly. They are still interacting with each other. Then comes Hitler. Then comes the Nazi movement, and Hitler is on the screen of Germans at least 10 years before he is voted into power, before he becomes Chancellor of Germany in 1933. So there is, an incubation period, a sort of habituation period during this time, and this person who is very dear to the Klemperers, he is clearly, as Victor notices, falling under the influence of the Nazis. So one day they have a conversation, and he asks him, "Doesn't it bother you that you are now buying into, that you are basically sort of falling into line with a movement with an ideology who is actually thinking that I don't belong, that I don't have legitimacy, that this person that you like, me and my, his wife, who was an Aryan, she was just an ethnic German, doesn't that bother you?" So what does he answer? Well, he answers what many people answered at that time: it's just talk. It's just talk. Just wait. When Hitler gets into power, he will not do anything about the Jews. You are fine. Well, Klemperer is not exactly thinking that this is just talk. And anyway, what is considered just talk is not nothing. Even if it were just talk, it is not nothing, you see. Even if it has not become, deeds and, deportations and so on, it's still something, So he said, "Doesn't it bother you?" But he said, "It's just talk." So they don't see each other for some time. Some months go by, they haven't seen each other, and then this person who has been a guest in their home, he calls up and he invites him, Victor, and his wife Eva, for dinner to their home. And then they say, "How have you been? What's going on, lately," and so on. And this person tells him, "Well, the other day we were out in the streets, me and my friends, and we ran into these communists, and we ran after them, and we gave them a beating with our whatever instrument it was, and we gave them some castor oil, which, you use castor oil, normally, and just beat them up, these communists, And it was what was it? It was just a little Strafexpedition, This is a new vocabulary. It is that you can do something outside the framework of law. Outside the legal framework, you can do something that has no legal consequences for you. You can commit a crime, and it isn't considered a crime. It was just a punitive expedition. Now, at that point, Victor Klemperer, what does he do? He hangs up. He terminates the conversation. They don't say anything about the dinner invitation, nothing more is happening. So there are two things here. One is a person who is falling under the spell of the Nazis. and has said it's just words when even words is something, you know. And then he is now participating in these, you know, punitive expeditions and thinking that it is a joke. And then you see alienation. People who used to be friends are not friends anymore, and they cannot be friends. They cannot be friends because, you know, this is just too deep. This is a schism in society between those who buy into this and those who resist, and not very many resist. You know, that's the idea. So Frank, this is new vocabulary where the ones carrying out the Strafexpedition at the beginning will be sort of gangs, you know, just ad hoc youth groups. Eventually they will be police forces in uniform. Eventually they will be part of the state machinery to carry out these expeditions. A Staatsakt is a state occasion where the state stages a kind of, you know, what they used to do in, especially in the city of Nuremberg, where they would have these enormous get-togethers. Hundreds of thousands, 1 million people would come to Nuremberg, and Hitler would give his speech, and all these soldiers would march, and you have seen videos of that. And this is just a sort of drill exercise for patriotism. And then in the language, everybody, Hitler goes to the bathroom. It is historical. You know, Hitler brushes his teeth. You know, it is an historic event. You know, whatever he does, you know, he's always there in your face, in your eyes, you know, always sort of intruding on you. And everything he does is, you know, historical. You cannot avoid it because the choreography of influence is, you know, a certain way. So these are the first 3 words. He writes in his diary, the LTI is destitute. Its poverty is a fundamental one. It is as if it had sworn a vow of poverty. This is linguistic poverty. This is where, you know, you talk in what looks like sentences, but it isn't real sentences. And if it is a real sentence, it is the same sentence over and over. You know, it's repetition, you know, saying the same thing over and over. There is, you know, every language able to assert itself freely fulfills all human needs. It serves reason as well as emotion. It is communication and conversation, soliloquy and prayer, plea, command, and invocation. The LTI only serves the cause of invocation. You come out there loud, you know, strong, you know, in a sort of formalistic language, and that's it. You know, you never get beyond that. There is the sort of, you know, the undulations of language and communication is gone. Now, for abuse of language, you can read George Orwell, of course. You know, 1984. You can read Brave New World. You know, but reading Victor Klemperer is one step up from reading George Orwell. I think Victor Klemperer is a keener observation, and he is, after all, a trained linguist. He is, after all, someone who knows language very well. It's definitely worth listening to him. And so Germans will take a while before they catch on, before they understand what Hitler is up to. You know, that will be 10 years. I mean, it might be not till the end of the war they understand, well, we were had, you know, we were duped, we didn't get the point. Victor Klemperer, how long does it take for him to get the point? Perhaps 1/2 sentence. Perhaps 1/2 sentence. He hears it immediately. That this is poison. This is someone who is serving us, you know, stuff to drink from a poisoned well. And he sees it immediately. And in some ways he thinks that you and I should see it too, you know, that there is, it isn't just a sort of power, persuasiveness of Hitler that is, you know, that is sort of playing out here. It is also, you know, human vulnerability, human gullibility, you might even say. So anyway, he sees it right away. March 10, 1933. On Saturday the 4th, I heard part of Hitler's speech from Königsberg. The front of the hotel at the railway station illuminated, a torchlight procession in front of it, torchbearers, all, you know this thing. I understood only occasional words, but the tone, the unctuous bawling, truly bawling of a priest. Hitler declaiming like a pastor. Yesterday Hitler put on a big show in front of the Reichstag, the voice of a fanatical preacher. You know, can you, by paying attention to language, make some kind of assessment about the quality of what is going on? Can one today, by paying attention to language, make some assessment of the things that go on in our time? So here he says that they re-engineered the language because fanatical used to be a negative word. But in the Nazi vocabulary, being fanatical is a good thing. The more fanatical you are, the better you are. That's what they all want you to be, you know. The Führer must be followed blindly, blindly. The main thing for tyrannies of any kind is the suppression of the urge to ask questions. You can discuss theology too, you know, in light of these things, you know, what sort of ideal would one like to have? I thought this one is good. Wow. I thought about, you know, our Adventist history of country life and country living and stuff, and I'm not wanting to disparage that. But just take this with a grain of salt. He's an expert on French literature, and one of the great French writers is Rousseau, who writes about nature and writes about how you should be raised. Rousseau wrote a book called Emile, about how you must not spoil this wonderful child by education. You know, you must let sort of nature run its course. Yesterday and today I worked through Rousseau's Encyclopédie Article Économie Politique. Whole passages could be from Hitler's speeches. When politicians idealize rural labor, they are always being hypocritical. Rousseau has never triumphed to such a degree, nor been taken ad absurdum to such a degree as today. The posthumous unmasking of Rousseau is called Hitler. Yes, David. Wow. You know, exactly. So you get things put into perspective by this person who can, in some ways, assess, you know, things that have influenced us. You know, where you romanticize some things, and it isn't really that great. Who voted Hitler into power? It was mostly the rural people living in the rural areas, and mostly people living in the rural Protestant part of Germany. I'm not making this up. His base of support was the Protestant evangelical, mostly people living in you know, in the countryside. Yeah, here. Anyway, the religious texture here. I can send these slides to Dave, and he can share them with you if you are on a mailing list and have access. I'll just send you the slides so you can, you know, those of you who might be interested in. I want to include this one before we start discussing stuff. The Jewish question. I had this book special ordered for me. It was delivered to me in the hotel in Marburg. I ordered a lot of books on my way because I just thought, well, I need to get ahead here. I just can't stop being intrigued by these things. Here is a book called Heidegger and the Jews, written by a an Italian professor. It's a very, very interesting book. What about Immanuel Kant? What about the German philosophers? What about Heidegger, who is considered perhaps the greatest German philosopher in the 20th century? They all think there is a Jewish problem. They all have, something to say about the place of the Jews in a sort of philosophically meaningful way, as though that is a sort of philosophically meaningful. I actually think one could do amazingly interesting things from an Adventist theological point of view by engaging with this thing. We can't do it now. Here is what Klemperer says. There is no German or West European Jewish question. Whoever recognizes one only adopts and confirms the false thesis of the NSDAP and serves its cause. Until 1933, and for at least a century before that, the German Jews were entirely German and only that. There is only one solution to the German or West European Jewish question: the defeat of its inventors. And other questions, other problems we have in history, maybe they all have a simple solution, that what is said to be a problem isn't the problem that it is said to be. See, the Jewish question. Yeah, this is my last one from Klemperer. What was the worst day? The worst day, he says in his diary in 1941, and when he writes in 1946, the worst day was the day when they had to sew the star on your clothing, and you were somebody, you were an other, you were othered, you were excluded. You had to identify that yourself as someone, that you could, be, anyone's prey. It was the worst day. So here is a text from the New Testament, because the language of bearing witness is New Testament language. Who likes the language of witness the best in the New Testament? Lots of words, martyreo, martyria, witness. It's John. The Gospel of John is full of language of witness. The book of Revelation, the language of witness. So I have, this one I can go back to in a little while, but here are some questions to discuss. To what extent may the concept of bearing witness apply in our lives, our institution, our church, and our nation? What is the connection, if any, between Klemperer's commitment to bearing witness and Jesus' use of the same words for his life and ministry? And bear witness, is it any use? So I'm not, we're going to talk now. You are free to weigh in on anything related to the topic I am privileged to share. I have another slide I will return to at the end, but let's do...
Would you like to show it now? Or?
No,
okay,
I don't.
Okay.
We can do the stoning at the end.
Okay, so if you would just raise your hand, you never need a microphone, Doctor.
Thank you. I can't let this moment pass because there are people here, Dr. Tonstad, who are of German ancestry with a German name like Brandstätter. I had an uncle Hermann, and I had another uncle named Gustav Adolf. I'd like to remind you and the rest of us here that there was also a Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and there was also a Martin Niemöller, that the German tradition produced people of great character that have taught us a great deal. And I actually heard Niemöller speak when I was a medical student in my teenage years, and he came to Adelaide University and gave a major lecture there very soon at the end of World War II. And I'll never forget that. So the witness of those unique Germans stays with me and will always stay.
Yeah. It's good to bring that perspective up, you know, and it's also good for me to clarify that my understanding of the issue, you know, what happened in Nazi Germany, should not be understood as a German issue only. The Hungarian Nobel laureate Imre Kertész, who was a Jew and who was at Auschwitz as a child, he is very careful to say that, you know, don't make it German, you need to make it human. Yes, Germany was, you know, is part of this story. You cannot talk about it without talking about, you know, some things that are German. But you need to sort of generalize it more than that, and sort of take away the sort of, you know, anti-German tendency that you might feel here. Now, to the specifics here, yes, there is a Martin Niemöller, there is a Dietrich Bonhoeffer. After the war, in about 1959, Bonhoeffer's biography, Eberhard Bethge, who was a friend of Bonhoeffer, he writes in a letter to Karl Barth, you know, yes, we were, you know, against Hitler, but we were not for the Jews. How is it, he writes to Barth, how is it that the Jews were hardly ever prayed for as Jews? You know, the Barmen Declaration, that is considered such a great Protestant sort of, you know, the confessing church putting distance between itself and the Hitler church, the mainstream church. The Barmen Declaration said that the Jews who had converted to Christianity should have equal rights in the church, that even if you were a Jew, had Jewish background, you could still be a deacon, you could still be an elder, but you could not be a citizen of the state. That was the problem. The Barmen Declaration didn't say a word about that, that your right to remain in the country as a Jew was taken away from you, but by all means, you know, you can be a deacon in university church. So, in Victor Klemperer's view, there are not many heroes, very, very few heroes, because, you know, the nation falls under the spell, some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, and a few manage to, you know, keep distance and sort of retain perspective during these times. Yes?
Hi there. I lived for the last 4 years, or some extended time, in Germany, and my experience with the German, especially older people, has been that a lot of them have PTSDs, even if they did not live during the war or they were very small. The elderly people, I mean, I took buses and trains and hung out with a lot of Germans. And I experienced that generally, a lot of anxiety. So that experience did not leave them without scars. The population is very much has borne the scars of war, even because of starvation, because of the experiences, the history. When they talk about it, it's like a dark, like awful. But I mean, my daughter had babies, and one little cry, the whole bus would shake with anxiety, like, stop this. So that's been my experience, very much of a PTSD.
Well, we're some generations downstream now. It's, you know, things have settled down. There is in Germany today a party, a political party, that thinks that the Germans have overdone it when it comes to repenting. That they should, you know, it's time to make Germany great again. You know, that kind of idea. We cannot go on, you know, sort of, you know, feeling sorry for what we did. So, so because Germany has put a memorial inside Berlin. Have you seen the memorial, Holocaust Memorial in Berlin? It's a huge area of coffin-like concrete blocks, ugly as H-E-L-L, and you know, very, you know, just random, very ugly, you know, all sort of. It's huge area right next to the Brandenburger Gate, very close to the Reichstag, you know, to the German Parliament. And someone from this new party, Alternative for Germany, said this is, you know, which nation confesses its worst sin in the middle of its capital? You know, we're sort of overdoing it. Well, this person who said this, who was a member of this Alternative for Germany party, he lives somewhere outside near Berlin, I'm not sure exactly where, but someone who said that you cannot rewrite history, you cannot falsify history at your will. History is whatever it is. Somebody bought the property next door to this person and put on that property lots of the same types of concrete blocks that you have in the heart of Berlin, and said, this is our history. This is us. You know, this is what we did. It is actually quite amazing to visit Germany these days and to see, in some ways, the depth and the honesty of the historical accountability that Germany has sort of worked itself through. You know, I think that in many ways is more impressive than to talk about, you know, the German resistance, which certainly existed, but you know, the aftermath has been better. Yes, Charles. Hi.
Hi. Thank you, Sigve. I do promise to go and read Klemperer, which I have not done, I have to say. And like many in the room, I do have German heritage. My mother was fully German, and I'll be there visiting relatives soon. And what I've noticed over the years, as you probably have, is that my Adventist friends there, in many cases, were fairly avid Nazis. The head elder of the church we attended when we lived not in Germany but in Salzburg was a Nazi. His son, who's a friend of ours, was in the Hitler Youth. And I might have thought that the Adventist prophetic stance toward beastly powers would have been a kind of prophylactic against that sort of thing, but it didn't seem to be. And I think that's well documented by a number of Adventist historians, and easily documented. And it doesn't seem to be now. And I wonder if you've thought about why.
You mean why Adventists sort of fell into it? Why Adventists who are
I might have thought, with all of the emphasis on the potential for beastly action on the part of political powers, that Adventists would be suspicious of all such kind of language then and now, but it doesn't seem so. It seems very easy to snuggle up to those beasts, turn them into teddy bears and go to bed with them. Why is that?
Well, I'm hoping that you are going to answer it. But let me just say that you are right, and that maybe that is the most important, you know, thing we as a community can ask ourselves. That's sort of where we are in it. You know, what sort of accounting would we have, and accountability? Because the German Adventists did, you know, fall in line. They did position themselves just like other German Protestants who thought that Hitler in some ways was a savior figure, and who thought that the anti-Jewish language was just, you know, what you threw in that for the same price. You know, it wasn't. They did not react to it. And what's his name? Johannes Hartlapp. Johannes Hartlapp is a historian at our school in Germany, at Friedensau University. he has written a most amazing book about these days and the Adventist response. And what is it? It's the vulnerability in some ways of the person who knows prophecy. And when you know prophecy, you know history. And the villains of history are, you know, the Pope, he lives in Rome. He's not the Chancellor in Berlin. You know, the sort of, you know, your values are not values. They are tied to specific actors and specific events. So Adventists were staunchly anti-Catholic during this time. But, you know, yes, you treated the beast like, what did you say, teddy bear, you know, something, you know. The Adventist community did approve and did, with very few exceptions, actually become, you know, part of a supporting cast for the Nazis. So, yes.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. I like to say that in abnormal times, it's not very easy to keep your moral compass. My wife and I experienced times like this, and we know what that means. In regard to the last comment that you made about asking for forgiveness, I remember that Willy Brandt, the Chancellor of Germany, he was a social democrat. He visited Poland and he knelt in front of the monument of German atrocities and asked forgiveness for Germany for what they did during the war. Now, in regard to the Jewish problem, of course, it didn't start with Hitler. It has deeper roots in Germany. We can start with Martin Luther, even if we can go even farther than that. But Luther, in the beginning of his ministry, he was in favor of the Jews. He was very positive toward them because they want to attract them, to convert them to Christ. When he realized that they do not convert, he was furious and became very antagonistic against them. Of course, I want to mention Luther because he was kind of putting the foundation of the attitude of the Protestants in Germany toward the state. He came up with a doctrine of two kingdoms, the kingdom of Christ and the secular kingdom. And of course, he advocated in favor of a distinct separation between these two kingdoms. Well, throughout centuries, they were kind of, that doctrine didn't preserve the purity as Luther formulated, because they understood it that they do not have to take any attitude about the secular governments, what they are doing. Well, now in 1933, when Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany, they adopted a constitution very quickly after Hitler became Chancellor. And in this constitution, it was a paragraph that was talking about the Aryans. That was promoting the superiority of Aryans, the German race. And of course, that created a serious problem for the Christian church. Like all dictators, Hitler wanted to control the Lutheran church, the Christian church. And it created the national church. He put a Bishop Miller in front of it, as head, and he tried to control it. But some of the Protestants didn't accept that. They created a new kind of church that was called Confessing Church. The other one was called German Christians. Well, for the Christian church, it was a serious problem, this paragraph, because you have the Jews. I mean, this paragraph was clearly anti-Semitic. You have the Jews that converted to Christianity, and what to do with them, because they were not German citizens recognized anymore. What to do with them in the church? Well, of course, it was contrary against the Christian principle that once somebody baptized and became a Christian, it's a follower of Christ. But they gradually try to put up, to become favorable to Hitler, and to put up these Jewish people that became Christians First of all, they started with the leaders in the church, the Jews leaders.
I think I will interrupt you a little there. I think you have made some very useful, important points about the time, and we could go down that road even more. Let me just say as a comment, for the kind of anti-Semitism you have in Luther, there is a remedy. You become a Christian. For the anti-Semitism of Hitler, becoming a Christian doesn't help you. Viktor Klemperer has converted to Protestantism, but Hitler's anti-Semitism is ethnic. It runs through blood. It is racial, not confessional. So, you know, Luther would have rejoiced if the Jews had become Christians, and Luther's understanding of Christianity is in some ways very defective, because, you know, can you not let them live? You know, can you not respect their views and so on? But Luther will not do that. So the Hitler, and the Aryan, the problem of the Aryan paragraph, the church responds to it in the context of church, but it doesn't respond to it in the context of citizenship. My Jewish fellow citizen is entitled to equal rights with me. You know, that issue, the Christians don't do it, and the confessing church doesn't do it either. You know, it's not solved there. Yes?
I have a comment and a question. The comment just goes further on where you're going. I have written about the Nazis and Adventists, and just to give you one example, during the war, the Central European Division wrote to, which was Germany, wrote to its members saying to them, it is fine for you, we encourage you to work in munitions factories on the Sabbath.
Hold it closer to you. Hold it closer to you.
Sorry. My question is, I don't know how common a name Klemperer is, and I'm wondering if he was related to Otto.
He was. Yeah, they were cousins, I think.
Cousins.
Yeah. Okay, I think our time is running out.
I got one more question back there.
Okay.
Any use? Can we discuss the last question? Is it any use?
What?
Okay.
The question you have there, we haven't discussed it. Is it any use to bear witness? Is it any use?
I'm waiting for you guys. Well, if we're going to take Viktor Klemperer as an example, you know, it is, you know, he wants to bear witness. What keeps him going, what makes him survive, is actually, you know, his commitment to bearing witness. You know, and eventually he thinks that the you know, yes, it will, maybe the Jews will all die, you know, but the Nazi movement will go down to sort of speaking truth, you know, and bearing witness and well, taking issue with what is happening. That's what is left to him. And it seems, if there is any overlap between the concept of bearing witness in the New Testament and Viktor Klemperer's act of bearing witness, then bearing witness is a key value in the Christian witness as well.
There was one more slide, Bill.
Yes, I think I have time for that.
Yeah, you have time for that.
Well, 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Now, if anyone wants to continue the conversation, we will have an open house at our house tomorrow at 5:30. Our address is 11695 Wellebeer Street. 11695 Wellebeer Street in Loma Linda. Any who wishes to join us, I might show some slides from these sites. That is possible. On the issue of, you know, these Aryan issues, One of the books that I was reading on my way is this book by Amos Elon, The Pity of It All. This is a very, very good book. I really recommend it. In the year 1743, a young boy, Jewish boy, hunchback, it's 14 years old, knocks on the door of Berlin and seeks entrance. His name is Moses Mendelssohn. Moses Mendelssohn is one of the most influential Jewish thinkers of centuries, and he becomes a leading figure in Germany and in the Jewish community. That's 1743. In 1933, a young Jewish philosopher leaves Berlin, almost the same route that Moses Mendelssohn came on when he arrived in Berlin in 1743. Her name is Hannah Arendt. And all this hard work, all this effort to become German, all this buy-in to, belonging, has in some ways, come up short. Thus the title of the book, The Pity of It All. Now, my slide. Germany again, great again. Ethnicity defines nationality. You mix ethnicity and nationality. Is that a good idea? Should you do that? Should nationality be defined along ethnic lines? Soil and culture. The enemy, that you have an enemy. There is somebody out there out to get you. Who is the enemy in Germany? It is the Jews, the Jewish conspiracy, the world, world Judaism, world Jewry, whatever. The role of resentment in political ideology, that you speak resentfully, that you see yourself as a victim, and you make a fake news, and you have violence, and you have institutional disintegration. That's on the menu here. Then, and then our time is up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And again, the 5:30 tomorrow evening, and your wife has approved this as well.
5 or 5:30?
Wait, did you say 5 or 5:30?
I said 5:30.
5:30. Okay, and that's
11695 Wellbeer.
Okay.
It's the heartland of Loma Linda.
Dr. Tonstad will be here. You can chat with him afterwards. At this time, we'll have our benediction. Oh, and before we have the benediction, next week it's Henry Lamberton will be speaking to us. And then it's going to be Peter, you're coming that.
Yes.
And then Rodney's going to be back speaking to us. So that's going to get us through June. And we're talking about having a book after that. So watch this space. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
What?